Hey, what's going on, good people, and welcome to another episode of Riley Sports Talk. Yes, I've changed the name, as you can see, as I do a lot of videos, so we'll break them down to sports, politics, what have you, but that's another story for another day. So today we're just talking about strictly sports, more specifically the NFL and the playoffs. So Bears vs. Saints, that's the game we have, that's the game we're going to cover today. So it should be a pretty interesting game, more interesting than a lot of people might give it credit for. So let's go ahead and get straight into it. Welcome to the playoffs, the culmination of the 2020 NFL season. One of our favorite times of the year. One thing I learned this year, with COVID and things of that nature is no matter what, in America, the NFL is still king. I mean, with no fans in the stadium, we all still got up every Sunday or Monday or Thursday, whenever your favorite team was playing, and we still watched the games, we still gambled, we still talked our crap, what have you. So this is it, the culmination of the 2020 NFL season, the road to the Super Bowl. But you know what to do. As always, subscribe, like, and share before we get into the games. Let's get into the team. As I said, we have the Bears versus the Saints. I'm going to start off with the Saints. Saints, 12-4. Won the NFC South. I think the Bucks came in second in that league. So now this year they're the number 2 seed. Now normally the Saints would have a bye here, but because of COVID and the NFL playoff rules this year, only one team gets a bye, and this year that's the Green Bay Packers in the NFC. So it kind of sucks for the Saints, but they're still in the playoffs. And so this is their 4th straight playoff appearance. That's not bad in the NFL, in my opinion, as some teams go years without making the playoffs. So the Bears, 8-8, second in the NFC North, right behind the Green Bay Packers. Now, they were a benefit of this year's seeding, because if this was last year, they would not make the playoffs, but they got the number 7 seed this year. They unfortunately backdoored their way into the playoffs as they lost to the Packers last week. And I think it was Arizona that lost that allowed the Bears to backdoor their way into the playoffs. So let's get into our next slide. An interesting find. Both of these teams are tied for the second oldest rosters in the NFL. As you can see, the years of age right there. Now, I don't know why the Bears are that old, but I'm pretty sure that the Saints, theirs is skewed a little bit because of one guy. This dude here, as you can see him back in his Purdue days winning the Rose Bowl. But Drew Brees, the ageless wonder, him and Tom Brady both. Drew Brees is past 40. As you can see, he's 41 years old. But don't let his age fool you. Drew is still a deadly NFL quarterback. No, this is not the 2010, 2009 Super Bowl Drew Brees, but this guy still can play some NFL football. So that's probably one of the reasons why the Saints, that's why their team is probably so old. So let's get into our next slide real quickly. As usual, team offenses. I'm going to start with the Saints. I was kind of shocked by this stat here. They're 12th in total offense. I thought they were a little bit better, especially with all those weapons that they have out there, especially Kamara. So 12th in total offense at 376 yards per game, 19th in passing yards, 20th in receiving yards, and they are 6th in rushing. Whereas the Bears, there's no secret. The Bears have their fair share of offensive struggles. As you can see, 26th in total offense at 331 yards a game, 22nd in passing, 22nd in receiving yards as well, and 25th in rushing. Now do me a favor. These numbers here, write them down real quickly. You can pause the video if you need to. Write them down. The total offense for the Saints and the total offense for the Bears. We're going to come back to those numbers because those numbers are going to be very key in this game. Team defense. The Saints, 4th in total defense at 310 yards a game, and the Bears are 11th at 344 yards a game. Again, just like the last slide, write these numbers down or, remember them in your head, what have you, because we're going to come back to these numbers as they are very key in this game. So, as Bears and Saints fans can tell you, this is a rematch from week 8. And that game went late into overtime as well, with the Saints winning on a field goal. I think they kicked the field goal with about 1 minute and 30 seconds left or something like that. Saints went on the field goal 26-23. I think this was the Bears' second straight loss after that 5-1 start they had. And this was the Saints, I think they was coming off of a loss the week before. So this was a pretty good game. It was really close, and there was a reason why it was close. You would think that the Saints, with all the weapons, that they could blow out the Bears and stuff like that. There's a reason why they did, and we're going to get into it. Now, again, as I said, this is a rematch, but as always, there is always a problem with playing a team for a second time. So One of the rematch problems is defeating a team you've previously beaten, especially in a close score. As we saw that first game, it went to overtime where the Saints won 26-23. So that's always a problem trying to beat a team 2 times in a season. It's not as easy as people think it is, because guess what? Especially in a close game, because now that you pretty much in a close game, it's almost like you're only 1 or 2 plays away from possibly winning that game. That's how the losing team would see this. The other problem is the reverse of that. Beating a team who's beat you regardless of the score. So for the Bears and the Saints here, the Saints actually have the edge on the Bears mentally because they've already beaten them. And on top of that, if I can recall, they beat them in New Orleans, I think it was. I'm not quite sure, but I think there was a home game for New Orleans, and this is going to be a home game for New Orleans as well. So that particular game, we're going to dig into the stats for the Bears from that game. So up here, the Bears, 19 tackles made at the second level. Now, for those that don't understand what the second level is, I consider the second level anything behind the linebackers at about 4.5 yards or 5 yards downfield from the line of scrimmage. Let's just say 5, make it a nice round number. 19 tackles at the second level, 19 tackles at the second level, that is a lot of tackles being made. That means the Saints are moving the ball at will. Now, if you look at this right here, the average amount of offensive plays in the NFL for 2020 is about 77 plays a game. So if you take that stat, that means the Bears allowed the Saints to get to the second level at an astoundingly high 25% of the time. That's high. That means 5 yards here, 6 yards here. That's not counting long plays. I think that particular game, Kamara had like a 60-yard reception. Wasn't that long, but it was definitely 40 plus. On top of that, Buster Skrine, he made 3 of those tackles. Now, I'm only counting 3 or more tackles. I'm only counting guys that made 3 or more tackles in that particular game. Skrine, I could be wrong here, but if I could recall, Skrine is only a nickelback. So your nickelback is coming into the game only on usually third downs or passing situations, and he's making 3 tackles himself. That's a lot of tackles to give up. That is a lot of yards to give up where your DBs is making a lot of tackles. Finally, the Bears only got 1 sack that game. That was a strip sack by Mack. But here's the problem with that. Mack only had 3 tackles for the entire game. Your best edge rusher needs to have more tackles than 3. I mean, you take the sack, you take the strip sack, what have you, force the fumble. So but that's only 3 tackles. You need more. This right here, in my opinion, is what lost the Bears that game. They allowed 5 sacks, and 2 of those sacks came in the overtime period. To me, that is what officially lost them that game. So, a couple of positives for the Bears in that particular game. Now, the defense held the Saints to 2 for 13 on third down. Now, keep in mind, the Saints is one of the best third down teams in the league. Now, we're going to get to that in a little bit. Miller and Robinson, they exploited the Saints secondary. Now, Foles was quarterbacking that week. Foles had a pretty good game, 272 yards, 2 TDs, and 1 interception. So that's a pretty good game. Now, this is not a high-flying offense, offensive pass game we have with the Bears. They exploited the hell out of the Saints secondary. They did all of this while missing 2 offensive line starters. So, the Bears line is okay. They're not the worst in the league. They're not the best in the league. But a starter is a starter. So you got to bring guys off the bench and have them start their game. And they still did a pretty good job in the passing game. On top of that, they kept this bad boy out the end zone. That is always a good thing. As you can see, what the dude had 6 touchdowns a few weeks ago. Kamara, he did not score that game. We're going to get to that in a second, though. So, for that game, for the Saints, Michael Thomas did not play. I don't recall what the reasoning was. He could have been hurt, could have been COVID, what have you. So, they only allowed 1 sack. Now, keep in mind, again, the Bears have some pretty good linebackers with Smith and Mack. So, only allowing 1 sack, that's a pretty good, indicator that your O-line did extremely well. 5 sacks. Now, sacks are also a part of field position. So a few of those sacks, especially in overtime, it took the Bears back from, field goal range or possible touchdown or driving for a first down. It just changes field position. So you got 5 sacks that game. But unfortunately, like the Bears, the Saints had too many players in the second level. So 3 of their leading tacklers actually were defensive backs that game. You never want your defensive backs to be your leading tackler, especially 3 of them. So that's a lot of big plays that they gave up against an inept offense. Also for the Saints, although he didn't score, as I told you, This boy had 163 yards from scrimmage. I mean, this guy is a beast to me. He's probably, everybody likes Derrick Henry. Everybody likes Cook and stuff like that. I still think Kamara, in my personal opinion, is the best running back in the league, but that's another story for another day. Also, the Bears had a really bad problem, not just with Kamara, but Murray and Hill, especially Hill. Hill had a touchdown reception in that game. He's also a quarterback. We know this from when Brees was out. So the three-headed rushing attack monster was killing the Bears that entire game. So let's go to our next slide. Compare and contrast. Now, remember those numbers I told you to write down earlier? There was a reason for it, and here we go. These two teams are only separated by about 45 yards total in offense. The Saints get about 45 yards per game more than the Bears. Now, you can look at that in one of two ways. You can look at that as a bad thing or as a good thing. But how that first game went, I look at it as kind of a good thing. That means that this can easily be narrowed. Same thing on defense. They are only separated by 35 yards a game in total defense, with the Saints being a little bit better than the Bears. Now, this stat here just caught me off guard. They are separated by exactly 2 points per game in points allowed. The Saints allowed 21.1 points per game, whereas the Bears allowed 23.1 points per game. This here tells me that that first game, that Week 8 game, was not a fluke. Although the Saints won, the Bears lost, the score itself and how it was played was not a fluke. Both teams played to their advantages and their strengths. Now, these two numbers down here, this is how a close game can become, this is how a close game can become a blowout very fast. The Saints are number 4 in turnover differential at +9, whereas the Bears are tied for 23rd at -4. So basically what that means, the Saints caused 9 more turnovers than they've committed themselves, whereas the Bears have committed 4 more turnovers than they caused. As I said, this is how a 17-10 game becomes 35-21 very fast, because turnovers, pick sixes, field position, short field, what have you. So the Bears especially need to watch this stat here, whereas the Saints, do what you've been doing. Let's get to the game within a game. Now, I found these stats quite interesting here. The Saints are 10th in the league in penalties with 98 for the year. So they're pretty high up there. But this one right here is problematic here. The Saints had 1,005 penalty yards, which is second in the league, only behind Jacksonville. Now, Jacksonville, you can kind of expect that. Jacksonville was one of the worst teams in the league. Matter of fact, the worst. So this tells me that the Saints give up a lot of pass interference yards. This is a lot. This is a lot to give up. And it's a lot downfield. As I said earlier, Nick Foles, he kind of exploited their secondary. So that tells me the Saints have problems in their secondary. Now, the Bears are 15th in the league with 88, and they have 777 penalty yards. That's kind of high. They're on the high end of it. But if you compare and contrast these two stats right there, that right there can be the difference in this game. Not just penalties itself, but the amount of yards you're giving up. So it's one thing to give up, a false start, which is just 5 yards or what have you, versus a 30, 40-yard pass interference penalty. Now, these down here, the Saints, now I said earlier, the Bears did a damn good job against the Saints in third down in that particular game, because the Saints are the third best team in the NFL at converting third downs. So they did a pretty good job, but we all know the Bears offense is not that good. The Bears are next to last in converting third down. That's just not good. You cannot be, you already have an inept offense. So you cannot be next to last and not converting third downs, because you're not moving the chains. So let's get into our next slide real quickly. Questions for each team. Can the Saints clean up the secondary against the Bears? As I said, earlier, the Saints have a problem in their secondary, but it does help, or they might be lucky that they're playing the Bears, because the Bears, again, offense, quarterback play, what have you. Can the Saints limit the penalties? Can the Bears overcome subpar QB play? I mean, this has been an issue for not just this year, in the entire Bears history. The Bears have always had subpar quarterbacks. Can they overcome that for one game? And again, can they convert on third down? You cannot be a garbage team on offense and, in worst case scenario, not converting third downs. You need to keep the chains moving. Next slide. This is the game. Now, as you can see, the Bears have a lot more on their side than the Saints, and there's a reason for that, because the Saints have an explosive offense. They have a better defense, so the Bears have more things that they need to do or not do to win this game. But this is the game. For the Bears, 5 or plus 5 yards per drive, offense and defense. Remember those numbers earlier. I said about 45 yards, give or take, that they're separated on offense and defense. For the Bears, that means if you're on offense, get 5 extra yards more than you normally would. That 5 yards can move the chains. That 5 yards can get you into field goal position. That 5 yards could be a touchdown. On defense, give up 5 less yards than you normally would. Same thing as the offense. That could be, to keep the Saints from moving the chains, what have you. The Bears, protect QB at all costs. At all costs. You have to protect him. You cannot take those 5 sacks like you did the previous game. Because I said 2 of those sacks came in overtime. Now, I went back and watched film of that game, and that was Foles. There was a couple of times Foles didn't have to take the sack, but he did. You have to protect him. Coaching. Nagy, you are not on Sean level. You are not on Sean Payton's level. He is a much better coach than you. But you need to bring your A game, dude. You need to. You cannot just keep calling these 2-yard passes or passing behind the line of scrimmage. You just need to bring your A game, bro. Quarterback, 0.5 seconds, a half a second. Release the ball earlier. The problem that Mitch plays like he's on Madden sometimes, where instead of throwing to a spot, he's waiting on the man to get open. So one thing I've noticed with Mitch, let's say a team is running a cover 2, and they're playing outside of the slot receiver. Well, guess what? A simple slant route, he's automatically open right there. Although there might be a little guy right there, but he's open for a hot second. You need to release the ball and then hope your guy can make a man miss. Allen Robinson, Miller, what have you. You hold the ball too long. You need to get the ball out of your hand. On top of that, if you're not going to release the ball earlier than Mitch, become Steve Young or Lamar Jackson. Just go. Just go, get to running, and you will figure it out later. Just go. You are very athletic. For the Bears, again, TDs only. I've said this. I will continue to harp at this, especially for a team like the Bears. Field goals hurt you. Field goals will continue to hurt you. You need touchdowns. If it's 4th and 2 inside of inside of the Saints side of the field, you need to go for it. No field goals unless it's taking the lead or unless it's to win the game. So this one right here is, to me, something I don't understand why a lot of teams don't do, but the Saints do it. Put Foles in if needed. Now, that's not necessarily if Mitch is having a bad game. If there's a situation, especially passing, where Foles would be the better option, put him in. I don't understand. Your job is to win the game, not keep a starter in because he's the starter. Keep Kamara out of space. As I said, the last game, Kamara burnt him pretty good. He burnt him pretty good for 163 yards because they kept letting him get into space. Once this guy gets the ball and he has about 4 or 5 yards of space in front of him, look out, he's gone. He's gone. He's going to get a good 10, 12 more yards. Again, with the Bears, do better on 3rd down. You just have to do better on 3rd down. You have to convert on 3rd down. And lastly, for the Bears, this one's going to catch some people off guard. Knock Breeze out the game. And I don't say that to be dirty. I don't say that to take a cheap shot. I'm not with this new school concept of once if you knock the other team's best player out, I wish you the best of luck. But at least I don't have to deal with you for the rest of this game. I'll deal with the next team next week. You're gone. Don't feel bad. If you have to take a nice hit on this man for a 15-yard penalty, take it from time to time, especially in the first quarter, what have you. Just take it. Knock him out the game. With the Saints pretty much do what you've been doing, but you need to limit the penalties. The penalties are they're killing you. They're killing you. That's probably the reason why you're not the number 1 seed. That last game, limit your field goals to a minimum. Saints had 4 field goals that game. They were 4 for 5 on field goals. So that game could have been much bigger of a lead for both teams, but they was both just kicking a lot of field goals. As I keep saying with the Saints, the secondary. Your secondary needs to tighten it up a little bit, bro. They were getting smoked. Of all teams you were getting smoked by, it was the Bears. You did it the first game, a pass rush, and you should be fine. Kamara needs the end zone. He needs the end zone. 163 scrimmage yards is nice, but get Kamara inside the end zone, and this game will not be close. Lastly, this is an interesting stat to me. Make Cook a priority, not an option. Jared Cook, the tight end. He has 7 TDs this year, but only 37 receptions. I'm not a math whiz, but I think that breaks down to about somewhere between 17 and 19% of every time he catches the ball, he has a touchdown. Now, more than likely, the Bears are going to come into this game looking out for Thomas, looking out for Kamara, looking out for Hill. they're not going to be worried about Cook, especially in the middle of the field. Now in the end zone, or excuse me, in the red zone, they're definitely going to be looking for him. But make him more of an option instead of just, make him more of a priority instead of an option in the red zone. Okay, let's get to gambling. As always, I get my numbers from Rivers Casino. So this number here is quite surprising to me. So when this matchup was first, completed or announced, what have you, I think at the time the line was 8.5 for the Saints. So that was kind of a high line, but most people was taking the Saints, obviously. As you can see, the line has went up. So that tells me that the money is still coming in on the Saints. So the Saints are expected to win this game by 10 points. So on the flip side of that, the Bears are expected to lose the game by 10 points. So for those that are not familiar, as always, if you pick the Saints, not only do they need to win, they need to win by 11. Because they only win by 10, that's a push, fancy word for a tie. Vice versa with the Bears. If you pick the Bears, if the Bears win the game outright, you don't have to worry about anything, you win. But if they lose by 9 or less, you win your money. If they lose by 10, then you pretty much get your money back. 11 or more, then you lose your money. So right down here, the money line. Saints are at -500. So you need to put up $500 just to win $100 if you are taking the Saints straight up. Whereas the Bears, you need to put up $100. You would win $400. So you pretty much have a profit of $500 if you pick the Bears to win straight up. Over under 47.5. I hate that over under. I really, really do. But I'll tell y'all about it in a second, because these guys in Vegas, or the guys that do the numbers, 47.5 is a really, really good number. These guys are really smart. So this is the gambling aspect of it. So over under 47.5. My predictions. Reason why I put at least I try. I live in Chicago. I have a lot of Bears fans, friends, and things of that nature. At least I tried, but I just couldn't come out, and it just couldn't come out. It's going to be Who Dat, the Who Dat Nation. It's going to be a very close game, just like in week 8. So I said, the stats do not lie. They do not lie. There was a reason why that game was close. Overtime, again, isn't out of the question for this game. Coaching and play calling, Nagy and Peyton, are definitely going to figure big in this game. Final score, Saints 24, Bears 23. The game will be won in the last 5 minutes of the fourth quarter. It's going to be close. It's going to be close. It's going to be real close. But the Saints are just too strong, and the Bears' turnover margin, in my opinion, is just too high. And the X factors for both teams is bad quarterback play for the Bears and Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill for the Saints. So, as always, thank you for tuning in. And like, subscribe, and share. And thank you for tuning in to Riley's Talk. Have a great day.